our 2-year-old daughter got put through active shooter training at her nursery. So I do remember that as a catalyst of being like, look, it's time we have a conversation too. It's time we have a conversation. San Francisco was just going great guns. It was the kind of time where you can build a 1 million square foot office building if you could get planning permission, and you'd lease every single square foot in one lease, pre-let. It was a really hot market. This is the 67 acres north of the King's Cross station. And the entire area went through a huge regeneration. So it's got to be up there in as a world-class, a leading example of what it's like if you get it right.
What keeps you up at night as a CEO? What's your take on the market right now? Leo, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Matthew.
Not at all. Look, it's a real pleasure that you're here. I know you're only recently in situ at your new job at the King's Cross Group as chief executive. Would love to spend a little bit of time unpacking that move and the opportunity and why you joined that new business. But before we get on to some of that good stuff, can you tell me a little bit about how and why you got into real estate in the first place?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. I think probably somewhere in there's some summers spent playing too much Monopoly. Subconsciously, there is, something about collecting, cards on the board. But I think, when I was growing up, there was a part of London, I was growing up in London, there was a part of London going through a big transformation around Shad Thames and Tower Bridge and all of those kind of warehouses that were being repurposed into what were at the time called yuppie flats. But I think what was really striking to me is that you had all of these old buildings and all this amazing history that had fallen into kind of disrepair and were being brought back and put to use. I found that really inspirational. And a friend of mine, his mum worked in the industry, and this is like a very early age, so I had no idea of what I wanted to do. My uncle was a currency trader and had the kind of white boy suit and lots of cash, and that all looked good. But I didn't really have any kind of specific career ideas. But this was in the kind of day when mobile phones were being put into cars, and so we'd be on these sort of car journeys with his mum, and the phone would ring 4 or 5 times or what have you, and one call would be from a bank. One call would be from an architect, one from a project manager, and so on and so on. And I just thought, what a variety of things she's doing. She'd be going from kind of, talking to a lawyer about a lease or a contract to actually designing the building kind of on the fly, or this has been discovered on site or what have you. I thought that sounded quite interesting rather than being like very specific into something, one particular niche of just doing law or just doing finance. And then sort of, the componentry of having that variety and then also the tangible outcome, so you're not just trading a currency or trading a stock or intellectual property, you actually see the kind of material fruits of your labor. So I thought that was really inspirational. And I did a summer of laboring for her, of just like on a site, carting stuff around and doing doing sort of manual labor. And there was a building in central London that she was repositioning into flats and medical use and stuff like that. And there was a kind of warning sign as you came through the door not to fall through the hole in the floor, just a giant hole in the floor, because they hadn't boarded it up yet and stuff. That was like one of the first things to do, was board up the hole so that people could actually walk in. And I thought, gosh, she is, this is it. This is it for my mate. He's going to have to sell his house. He's going to have to move out. This is a disaster. And we got to go, but we did a few weeks over the summer, and we got to go back at Christmas. And it just, like, the transformation, you could see where people were going to live or where these doctors' surgeries were going to be and medical offices were. So that sort of brought it all together. And so I was quite fortunate because, most people were sort of still working through what they want to do, even through uni or maybe even after. I was quite fortunate that I had that experience and thought, this is a brilliant thing. This is what I want to do.
But no immediate family in real estate?
No.
You went on to Cambridge to study political science.
Yeah.
Tell me about that decision.
How does that fit in?
Yeah, how does that fit into, what you've just told me?
It doesn't. It deliberately doesn't. I figured that I'd have decades to do what I, really passionate about career-wise and professionally. So I deliberately did something that I was just interested in from a kind of academic learning side of thing. Yeah.
And what were you like as a kid growing up?
I don't know. Do you want the redacted version or the...
Hit me with the honest view.
Good question. Relatively hard work is what my parents would feed back to me in terms of like quite high energy, quite demanding in terms of like, needing to have stuff to do and all of that. So I think that would be like the first bit of feedback that they would give. That everything was a negotiation, everything had to be, it wasn't, just them telling me. But then I guess to a degree, a little bit kind of older for my years in terms of the things that I was interested in and stuff like that. So I think to some extent that.
Fairly academic as well?
Yeah, reasonably. Yeah, no, I was.
You had to be, right? To get into Cambridge.
I was. I did.
But did that come naturally, or did you have to work quite hard at it?
Certainly in terms of kind of results and stuff like that, it went well. So I guess that would count as being academic, yeah. I think there's an expression, the sort of the harder I work, the luckier I get. Have you ever heard that before? But it's
it's like a golfing.
I've heard it in different contexts, but it probably is. I guess nothing like that comes without any work, right? So, my parents were relatively hardworking. My mum was hardworking. She had her own business. So I kind of had that modeled that she would kind of come home, do, whatever needed to be done domestically. My dad was pulling his weight too, but, she was, in this instance, she would come home and do her thing and then go off to work in the evening back again. And that was before the days of kind of working from home. She would go back to her shop and do whatever needed to be done or run her business. So, yeah.
Drilled in from a young age.
I guess so. And I also grew up with people who were quite a lot more fortunate than me economically and stuff like that. So I guess I had the kind of people around me who had the, the model of the how it looks if it goes well kind of thing.
So you went to Cambridge, did political science, and the rationale was to just explore a bit more of a kind of a passion.
Yeah, I was just really interested in. I ended up doing more kind of politics and philosophy. So it really sort of chin scratching stuff. Reading stuff about like the nature of society and morals and stuff like that. No real practical implications for doing real estate, but I enjoyed it nonetheless.
And that then gave you, or if I'm not mistaken, you then got a role at Brookfield Multiplex and did your master's at Kingston simultaneously? Yeah,
so I did that, which I don't think, I think is relatively standard. You do that kind of year or two while you're doing your RICS, your APC, you do your kind of master's outside. Well, there's a sort of, there's a very short interlude between that. I joined Cushman Wakefield on their grad program, and I lasted there 2 days. But not because I left or they kicked me out, but a client who was multiplex asked for some help of someone on secondment, and I guess they needed somebody really junior who didn't know what they were doing. So that was me.
So 2 days?
2 days. And that was, I think, 2 days into a kind of week training program on everything from like, how to write minutes, just kind of classic training program of here's how to dress for work kind of stuff that we put on, as well as some of the kind of skills like elevator pitches and all that kind of thing. And I was relatively fortunate because I wasn't feeling like I was driving with it. It all felt, I ended up quite fortunate to have the multiplex secondment that became permanent, and it was just two of us. There was a company there, but there was just two of us in the kind of European side of things. So it was kind of going off and buying quite high yielding stuff across Europe for an Australian pension fund and for Australian pension fund holders, and listing it on the Aussie Stock Exchange. And so extremely fortunate that I had that opportunity quite early on. And when there's only two of you, you have to take a lot of responsibility very early on, way in advance of what I knew was in terms of what I knew about the industry and the decisions we were making. But no, that was really positive. And then Multiplex obviously had the bit of a debacle building Wembley Stadium and got taken over by Brookfield. So that's how I joined Brookfield. The financial crisis hit. And there were a couple of instances where we worked very hard, and Brookfield doesn't do anything in small measure, right? So I was only there for 9 months, but we were working very hard on a couple of deals, a couple of M&A deals, platform acquisitions. And I think there were probably 2 in a row in short succession where we worked, a few, really hard, including a few weekends on the bounce to get something in front of IC. And the guys used the exact same words to say, look, guys, great deal, looks really interesting. Come back in 6 to 12 months and it will be cheaper. And the second time they said that, I thought, these are kind of wise folk around the IC table. I'll go traveling for 6 to 12 months because nothing's going to happen. Every day's depressing of, bad financial news. And then came back and joined Tishman when I got back, which was the start of a 10-year stint at Tishman, which was really good.
So you initially wanted to go down the kind of the surveying route, get your letters, do your rotations, but you kind of got hoiked out of that day 2. Chucked into Multiplex to work on a project, and you were kind of suddenly going, oh, well, this is a slightly different trajectory, but keen to kind of get...
I mean, if I'm really honest, I didn't have many options. I'm not sure I necessarily wanted to go down the surveying route and do all the range of things. I just knew that I wanted a general grounding in real estate. Cushman felt like a good shop to join. But I certainly found it. I mean, it might be very different now, but I don't think there was a scheme to join a Tishman or a Brookfield or what have you. That was your kind of general entry point, at least as I perceived it. And maybe lots of people out there had tons more opportunities than I did, but that's not what I experienced at the time. So frankly, had I had the choice of doing what I ended up doing or doing what I was offered to do, I would have taken what I ended up doing. So it played out really well in that sense.
And were you more development focused or more investment and transactionally focused?
So at the outset, I was much more financial, so investment, buying assets, raising capital. So we listed on the Aussie Stock Exchange. Similar vein for my short stint at Brookfield, investment and asset management. So much more financial at the outset. A not dissimilar role at Tishman. So I spent 3 years of the 3 of the 10 years here in London at Tishman Speyer, and learnt a lot. Really interesting, really enjoyable, but again, very investment and asset management focused, and raising capital, doing joint ventures, stuff like that. So a really helpful grounding. But I had there was one point where I was sort of taking a reasonable amount of responsibility on a transaction that was about $250 million, probably more actually in then exchange rate, of buying a building that we were going to buy for a kind of value add, repositioning, adding space to it, etc. And I was going through these kind of due diligence reports and really just thinking, it just struck me at the time, like, I know enough to interpret these reports. I know enough to talk to the people who've prepared them, sent them over and scrutinized them. But I don't know how to build this building. I'm basically going to be taking it apart, not me necessarily personally, obviously, but, not me running it. And I'm not sure I know how to put it back together and what it all means and what one HVAC system is or what this structural report is telling me. So I made quite a deliberate decision, or I made a deliberate request to get more involved in the development side. So very fortunate working somewhere like Tishman Speyer, you've got those opportunities to say, look, can I move to a different team? Can I spend a bit of time in a different team? I've been thinking about my career and where it's going. And there's lots of people out there in our industry that are really good at city office leasing. They spent decades doing like that one particular thing, or they do investment, or they do development management. But I felt like I didn't want to become that niche in my focus. I wanted to kind of broaden it out and really understand the whole part of owning, buying, selling, leasing, redeveloping real estate, everything to do with it.
Why is that? Just because you were really curious?
I thought it would make for better decision making. I thought it'd make my skill sets more rounded. Because I always thought it was weird that you would have somebody who would buy an asset with, say, a development business plan, hand it over to somebody else and the responsibility for it, and kind of lose that accountability, and then take it back to sell it or asset manage it. And I just thought, surely all of those things are kind of interlinked. There's real value to the person who buys the asset having the responsibility and accountability to deliver it, the whole part of the business plan. So I was interested in that. I thought it was good for me to know, and I was curious. So, you asked me about what I was like as a kid. I kind of love learning, still love learning. I just thought it was an opportunity to, grow professionally in that sense. And I also, this is just on the kind of list of, it would also be really interesting to move abroad, working at Tishman Speyer. You've got stuff in Brazil and China and India and the States. So I put my hand up for that and was very fortunate that I got an opportunity doing development in San Francisco. And that was in the office space, which obviously Tishman's, that's their main focus, but also in the residential market as well. So built a lot of units, refurbished office buildings, did build to sell, build to rent, did affordable, market rate, resi, as well as the office stuff as well. And at the time, San Francisco was just going great guns. It was the kind of time where you can build 1 million square foot office building if you could get planning permission in a very restricted planning environment to build that, and you'd lease every single square foot of it in one lease, pre-let. It was a really hot market. So that's obviously not to diminish anything that we did, but if you could position yourself well with good product, it was a really rising market. So there was this period where hard to come by, but if you had development sites or if you had opportunities like Tishman did, it was a brilliant learning experience. Worked extremely hard in that time, but that was sort of really broadening out my experience and obviously learning it in a different country, different place, across different asset classes, stuff like that. So that was a real positive. And then I went up to Seattle for a long weekend, and it just had that kind of atmosphere on the ground that you get in, you go to places that are rapidly gentrifying or rapidly growing or what have you. It had the sort of atmosphere that San Francisco had 2-3 years ago of this is about to take off. There's all these large companies like Amazon and Boeing and Microsoft that have got and Starbucks that have got strong prospects growing very quickly. So I opened the office for Tishman Speyer in Seattle to kind of bring that all together, the different asset classes and the different the different skill sets, if you will, the different the components of the role.
So at that stage, you'd had kind of the investment experience, kind of development, delivery experience. That kind of third piece was a bit more kind of business orientated, leadership driven in terms of actually setting up a platform flag office and trying to bring in all the skill sets and people to deliver on the plan.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't compare that to some of the people you had, some of the more entrepreneurial people you had on have really done it for themselves. You've got the backing and the business card of someone like a Tishman Speyer, so that opens a lot of doors. It's not quite as risk on and entrepreneurial as somebody who's doing it for themselves. But yeah, in terms of kind of building out an office, building out an infrastructure. But compared to, say, what we're doing now with the King's Cross Group, which is obviously, with an established estate, is kind of the inverse, right?
Yeah.
You're sort of building a new company. You don't have any of that kind of infrastructure behind you doing all of that, but with all the assets, right? Normally it's the other way around, or you don't have the assets and you're trying to build up at a more reasonable pace. So it's definitely not as entrepreneurial as a startup when we were in Seattle, but it was a really good thing to do.
And did you like that kind of leadership, management, people kind of challenge?
Yeah, I do. I think if you don't, you're going to have a really hard time kind of running any team and finding work engaging. And so sort of seeing people develop and take on responsibility and deliver against that is really motivating. I know for some people it's, more of a kind of a must do, but I think I genuinely enjoy it, but obviously it brings with it its challenges in the way that, just other parts of businesses don't.
You moved back to London in June 19, if I'm not mistaken.
Something, yeah, about that, yeah. Yep.
Why did you make the move back? And tell me about what it is you did.
Our daughter was 2 at the time. Everything was going fine. And we'd had a couple of like sort of life events in family back here in Europe. My wife's Swedish, my family are here. And we were sort of thinking, it's maybe time to move soon. At some point in the next kind of 0 to 18 months is time to start, upping sticks. And, I wasn't getting the traction that I had hoped for with, to set out the business plan, got a lot of key people on board. And for a number of reasons, it proved quite difficult to really get the business motoring up there. So, it was open to, I sort of was given it one more year, gave it that year, and then it was kind of an inflection point. And there was a very similar thing in my wife's life in terms of, her job and that kind of stuff. One thing I do remember, though, as quite a catalyst for it is our 2-year-old daughter got put through active shooter training at her nursery. And, this training, this is, they called it that, but this is like, practice for 2-year-olds to hide under a desk if there is an active shooter that bursts into the school, the nursery, what have you. And that doesn't sit well with any parent, I suspect. It's kind of a necessary evil in the States. It's not a necessary evil if you're Scandinavian and, you're used to an equal quality and across all forms of society, and people not wandering around with guns in schools. So I do remember that as a catalyst of being like, look, it's time we have a conversation too. It's time we have a conversation.
So you moved back to the UK.
Yeah.
And you landed at Aviva Investors as head of Central London.
That's right. Yep. And took on a few roles whilst at Aviva. And that was definitely a shift for me in terms of very different, still a large organization, et cetera, like a lot of the other places I work for. But perception in the market was a bit of a shift from some of the places I'd worked for. And especially at the time. And I met a few people there as part of the recruitment process. And I admit to have been a little skeptical about it as the right fit.
As in Aviva?
Yeah, for me culturally
pension,
and stuff like that. I didn't think that I would fit in. Obviously I worked for large companies, but they're all quite sort of dynamic companies in terms of, the way they run, but also the perception when you're going through a recruitment process of how do you perceive this kind of brand, if you will. So, I was a little skeptical. But I met the team there and it was very much like, well, you're right to be. We were. This is part of a transformation exercise. This is not performing to the way that we want it to or running, whether it's, full systems, rewiring to people and dynamics and culture and stuff like that. So everything was up for, for being revisited. And I met the sort of people hiring there and thought, really credible, dynamic group of people, give it a go. And look, you learn from everything. I was there just under 3 years and learned a lot about, sort of having a bit more rigor around some things like, some things that happen sort of a little bit subliminally in other places were like front and center, like risk and governance. And they worked in other places, but, some of that stuff, I learned a lot about ESG there as well. Worked with some really, really good people on that and some really good things. So I think, the perception somewhere has is not always the reality. And actually, we did some pretty dynamic things. And in terms of kind of launching new funds, we bought into an office JV in the middle of the second COVID lockdown. And that was, obviously a very interesting and lively IC debate, but they were sort of, open to taking those kind of risks and being a bit kind of counter-cyclical and stuff like that. So, the outside perception is not always what you'd experience on the inside, but Yeah, so I was doing that, and it originally started as quite a central London office focus role, and then became multi-asset, multi-sector across the UK. So for the first time, I'd done retail, done resi, done office. Now I'm sort of learning about spans and turning circles for industrial and stuff like that. Not necessarily something that I had on the to-do list, but again, all good learning and grounding and expansion of horizons. So yeah, that was another learning experience.
Property is a people business, hence the name People Property Place. Business has been tough the last couple of years. Get the people aspect wrong, business becomes impossible. Get the people aspect right, it's still hard, but it's manageable, much more enjoyable, and you're much more likely to hit your goals. So if you're looking to add top talent to your team in 2025 and you're open-minded to an alternative approach and you're keen to make business a little less hard, drop me a DM. I'd love to have a conversation with you to see how Rockborn could potentially help you with your human capital requirements. Right, let's get back to the podcast. You left Aviva to join Workspace, and you were head of real estate asset management before you left to go and be head of portfolio. Tell me about that move and why it came about.
So I guess what sort of at this point, my career is kind of narrowing in terms of geographical location. And I obviously had the opportunity to stay at Aviva, and wasn't like I wasn't enjoying it, and it was becoming broader and broader, the role. And I was starting to get involved in discussions about things where you sort of need a glossary at the back for all the acronyms, or it's becoming increasingly kind of like exotic financial instruments related to real estate rather than, or kind of derivative investments off of real estate rather than the kind of bricks and mortar stuff. So there's definitely an opportunity to stay and kind of get even broader experience. The Workspace role was, back focused on London, focus on flex space. So I did have a moment thinking, is that probably a narrowing where my horizons were expanding? But what I had the conversation, was approached by Workspace, but what a fantastic business. It's got sort of 70 or so assets across London, and it's not across central London. They're in parts of London that that are not necessarily deemed kind of traditional employment hubs. So you've got sort of historic buildings that are being repositioned in Bow or Lewisham or Wood Green, and they really are great historic buildings. The licorice all sorts factories, or the old Peak Freens biscuit factories, stuff like that. Old kind of taxi repair shops. So a great portfolio of buildings, and you're really working with your customers. So it's not the kind of decision maker at a Netflix. So you'd be doing a lease with a Netflix, say, and you might be dealing with the CFO or COO or something like that. So somebody who's clearly got their hand on the tiller, but it's very different from dealing with the actual person who's invested all of their time, their energy in their business. The level of kind of emotional attachment and engagement you have, and also the stuff that Workspace customers do. I mean, it's brilliant. It's across, from creative industries to, to more kind of desk-based professional service stuff, but some of the actual like hands-on creative things that people do in those buildings, because it's essentially in most of the buildings, a blank canvas. You can do whatever you like in them. And a great culture as well, just a really fun place to work, and a good business model. So I enjoyed it a lot.
There was a fair bit of change, I think, at a leadership level a few years back. That kind of prompt also part of the move in terms of going further up the ranks and taking on more responsibility and going up the career.
I don't know how active that was. I mean, I have quite a growth mindset. Want to take on more responsibility to commensurate with where I am in my career. Obviously, hopefully, not getting too far ahead of myself. But I do enjoy the kind of taking on more and being more accountable for and involved in things. And I had a good amount of responsibility at work, so I covered quite a lot of ground in terms of asset management, development, the revenue side, ESG. So there was, and the operational side in terms of, because everything's sort of vertically integrated at Workspace. So I had the kind of customer facing side and the facilities management. So a lot of responsibility in terms of, thinking back to that phone call of what can pop up in your day. A huge range, right, from really granular operational issues to quite big, value asset management stuff, and any direction from that. So yeah, I was happy there, but an opportunity came up to work at King's Cross, and build the business that we're currently building and manage what. I mean, I'm paid to think this, but I genuinely do think it, and can't take credit for it. But what I think is possibly Europe's best regeneration, and certainly I'm not sure I've got the knowledge of all of the global regeneration projects, but it's got to be up there in as a world-class, a leading example of what it's like if you get it right, from a mixed-use scheme that involves people, that attracts great corporate customers, that attracts residents, visitors, etc., good retail. So it's not to deny that there's things that we can improve and things that we need to keep evolving, but I think it's a brilliant place, and I walk through the estate obviously every day, and I find it quite inspirational and quite a special place. So very fortunate.
So give me some context, give me some background. I'm just thinking about the kind of the listener who maybe hasn't visited King's Cross or maybe doesn't know the story.
Yep.
Can you just set a little bit of the scene, and
Sure.
Then maybe we can kind of go through that journey in terms of that transition and
Yep.
why the King's Cross Group has been set up.
Yeah, well, as I say, I mean, I wasn't part of the transformation, so not really my story to tell. But this is the 67 acres north of the King's Cross station. So this is a kind of 25-year story of the kind of post-industrial areas to the north, that involved things like old coal sheds, old goods yards, etc., granary buildings. So where trains were coming from the north of England or the Midlands, deposit goods, coal, vegetables, what have you, in, and then pull out. And the entire area went through a huge regeneration. The 6-7 acres led by Argent at the time. There's 50 buildings there today, and they cross, there's 1,750 residential units, of which 40% are affordable. About a third of the space is open space, so kind of public space, landscape space, park. There's 4 million square feet of office space, 500,000 square feet, about 110 shops in Coldrops Yard and dotted around. And it's been on that kind of 25-year journey by Argent, now related Argent, who did an absolutely fabulous job of repositioning the area, and took quite a different approach from somewhere like a Canary Wharf, which went for quite a lot of density and height, and Canary Wharf did a fantastic job in bringing banks and large US banks and housing them and finding an outlet for them when city planning was much more restrictive. But they took quite a different approach at Argent and have quite an inclusive, porous environment. So we're on track this year to get 20 million visitors in terms of footfall. So it attracts a lot of people. A lot of those kids that come are running through the fountains, which has genuinely become one of my top sites in London. Just see the joy and hear the people having fun, people in the canal. At the moment, we've got the Everyman Cinema on the canal steps. And so it's sort of open to everybody, whether you're spending kind of 10 million in annual rent or whether you've, come and spend nothing. And I really like that about it. It's good, but obviously more to do, and the success story over the last 20 years definitely doesn't buy you success over the next 20 years. So we need to keep evolving, need to keep improving that, really need to focus on retaining our customers, whether they're small, medium, large corporate customers, and keeping the space special and relevant.
And so the whole idea of the King's Cross Group is a way for related Argent to basically finish the development project, recap out some of the investors, and I think Australian Super have come in, which is one of the largest
Yeah.
pension funds in Australia.
Yeah, so it's, it's not necessarily associated with a recap event now, but it's part of the kind of natural evolution of going from a development manager to an asset manager. And we, value-wise, revenue-wise, would be a mid-sized REIT. And you wouldn't hear, Paul Williams or Toby Courtauld or somebody of that, Lawrence Hutchins standing up and saying, well, our third-party asset manager has given us this information. That's something that you want to be connected to and control with. You want to have that kind of unfettered relationship with your customers and understanding of your operational side. So it's the natural kind of next step. There is a little bit more development to do. There's a little bit more development pipeline for us over the canal, which is really exciting. And hopefully we can bring some of that magic from King's Cross across the canal. But no, it's, there's sort of nothing to do with, it wasn't working or anything like that. I mean, it's worked splendidly well. It's about it being a kind of natural evolution and the natural next step to bring it in-house.
Yeah, so shift from a developer to an asset manager, and then just be responsible for the curation, the placemaking, the engagement, the driving of the wider estate through this next phase of being living and breathing rather than under constant development the whole time.
Yeah. And that brings a different set of challenges. So hopefully we'll get it right.
So you've been brought on as chief exec and you've been in situ since April.
Yeah, end of April.
What's been on the to-do list?
Everything. Absolutely everything and we have a to-do list in the office that, we've got, and it ranges from, put in place a governance structure, and a whole bunch of, how we're going to run the business, delegated authorities, how we're going to do reporting, all of that, to bringing over a whole bunch of people into the business. So in the next few months, we'll be substantially bigger than we are at the moment, all the way through down to, buy a chopping board and, everything in between. So it's been sort of a bit of everything all at once, and in some cases a lot of everything all at once, whilst we're fortunate we're not, it's not like we've got a kind of burning platform in terms of the asset management or operational side, but whilst getting to grips with all of that stuff, understanding it, hopefully improving it, we're looking at processes, looking at decisions, being involved in them as well. So yeah, a lot to get stuck into.
A lot of stuff to get your head around. Talk to me about that kind of people perspective, because if I'm not mistaken, some people are coming over from Related Argent, which would be the kind of natural continuation.
Yeah, so it's sort of, anybody that spends their time working on King's Cross gets to come over and be part of it. And it's a really nice TUPE transition consultation to do, because everybody who has made the place special, who's kept the place special, or is, part of continually evolving it, gets to come over and bring their knowledge, their skill set. So that's really positive.
How do you see kind of like the org chart or the structure, given the fact it's more of an asset management focused business?
In what sense?
So kind of asset management team responsible for kind of leasing, tenant engagement, customers. Yeah, I'm assuming there's not a development team per se, because there's not too much development other than the other side of the canal. Finance, there's not a transactional part of the business. Is it just literally that kind of asset management, leasing, engagement, placemaking? Is that kind of the skill set and the essence of what the people are going to be doing day to day?
There's more than that, because as a standalone company in asset managers, you need a finance team, obviously. You need an operational side for all of the operations that we have. And, people told me this when I joined. It's not that I didn't believe them, but, it was surprising at how often it came up. It's a really complex estate. There's a lot going on. And I thought, okay, I hear you. I don't deny that or underestimate it, but perhaps I do underestimate it, because, once I'm sort of now under the, in situ, there is always a ton going on. Because there are so many, it's big and spacious. There's so many events going on There's so many customers, so much footfall, etc. There's a lot of enlivenment going on. So you were saying to somebody who hasn't been there, one of the things that really strikes me is, in particular, outside of sort of 3 months in winter where, it's quite hard to make any public open space in London feel really lively. It's got a real energy to it, but that brings operational side. So there's an operational side as well. And then, you need we have chosen to want a kind of a marketing function in-house, because there's a huge amount of brand building, B2B side, B2C side. I mean, you don't get 20 million visitors without having quite an active events engagement and branding and marketing program. So there's a lot of that going on. And, we have our own ESG function as well, as you would expect. And quite ambitious plans on both the E and the S. And I was talking about what Argent did well. And in my opinion, one of the things that has been great, besides, it ticks so many boxes on the urban regeneration side of things, that there's the E side in terms of, putting good new buildings into brownfield urban sites, right? There's a great story there in and of itself. And the creation of jobs and all of that. That sort of naturally happens with any kind of development like that, but inherently it's got a good story to it from the ESG side. But I genuinely think it's really quite a porous place that is open to the community, open to people who aren't there to spend a huge amount of money. It's quite a premium product, King's Cross, but there's 40% social housing. There's a lot of people in the communities around us. There's 2 schools on site, 2 primary schools. So there's a lot going for it on the S side as well. So we have an associated ESG team that will be sort of looking at that strategy, executing it over the next 5, 10, 20 years as well.
How do you balance? You touched on the B2B marketing component and then the B2C. How do you manage both of those distinct groups, and how integral are they to each other as well?
Yeah, I think, revenue-wise and value-wise, almost all of the revenue and value comes from the B2B customers, as you would expect. Your Meta, Facebook, Sony, Universal, they are the ones that are paying the largest checks, as well as the B2B retailers. 95, the inverse of that in terms of brand perception amongst most people is on the B2C side. So I think there's a kind of an initial reaction where you think, okay, a lot of the marketing is really B2C focused. A lot of the positioning is quite B2C focused. But that kind of makes sense if you're trying to build a long-term brand. And one of the things that you mentioned, Aussie Super, as our kind of cornerstone investor, along with Federated Hermes, they both have kind of long-term sustainable value as a goal, rather than kind of let's, squeeze as much juice out as we can over the next 12, 24 months. It's a much longer-term vision. So what you're effectively doing, whether it's B2B or B2C, is that brand building, that kind of longer-term brand building, keeping it relevant, keeping it cool. And then in real estate, your ability to kind of pull those levers quickly is quite constrained. You've got a 15-year lease or a 5-year lease. It takes time to reposition things. But one of our challenges is, with all that going on and with changes in what people are looking for or what people want out of space or retail or events or what have you, on the events, we could be a bit more dynamic because we can change an event from year to year. Retail, probably a bit more dynamic, but still not fully dynamic unless we're really holding stuff back and being, quite aggressive in the kind of, short-term lettings, etc. But on the office side, the B2B side, if one of our main occupiers were to go massively out of fashion, or are set to go massively out of fashion, our ability to pivot is quite limited at that point. You have to wait for the lease event. So I think that's our kind of challenge, is staying like, I feel like I've inherited something that's really cool, really relevant, that resonates with a lot of people, including, younger generations. And I find that really inspiring, that younger generation will come to the estate and think it's really cool. But I sort of been handed this cool product that I've got to keep cool and got to keep relevant.
Fuck it up, Leo.
Yeah. You put it in a much better way.
Yeah, world-class destination. And we've got big aspirations and plans, don't mess it up.
Exactly that. Yeah.
You mentioned 20 million visitors, so clearly as a group you're hot on data. What role kind of does data and analytics play in terms of the curation and your mindset when it comes to expanding and developing the estate further?
Well, I don't mind a stat, so I don't know if we are market leaders yet on data, but the data that we do have, I think, is really quite helpful and quite powerful. There's certainly more I would like, but like I say, I think it's really, really helpful on the B2C side. It's really, really helpful on events, activation, enlivenment, understanding where people are going, and if you can get data through that shows where people spend, especially if you can link it back to a marketing campaign or an initiative you've taken to, it can be something really simple like changing the signage, the landscaping, the physical presentation, or changing the social media campaign and getting that to link through to actually it has an impact. That's really great. Not always easy to do, like to connect the dots, and takes time and takes quite a lot of infrastructure investment. But what we are really fortunate in is that with investors that see the kind of long-term value, there's the ability to propose those kind of things. And, I'm only a few months in, but I can see that already. I can see that in the kind of business planning and mindset and, reporting that we've inherited, that there is an openness and a willingness to go on that journey. And you don't get to a kind of product leadership or a value proposition like King's Cross without investing, and you don't stay there without investing. And
that long-term horizon that you touched on as well.
Absolutely. You need to keep improving, refreshing the product. So, there's definitely no burning platform, but as you said, there's this kind of an associated pressure of this is a really cool place, don't mess it up. And you need to keep thinking, well, what do I need to do that? What data do I need? What people, what team, that kind of stuff.
What do you think makes King's Cross so special? Is it just the eclectic mix of the affordable housing, the kind of the tech tenants, the kind of the footfall from an experience perspective, the high-end retail, the restaurant scene, the activations? Can you point to one kind of like special source that, links it? Or
I'm not sure I could point to one special source because, that was a pretty comprehensive list, but I'd also add in that the architecture isn't, there's not 40-story kind of Vancouver or Toronto style residential towers like bearing over you. There's a lot of open space. And that, the architecture of those heritage buildings is quite, it's really attractive as you're coming up from the station, and you've got kind of old buildings to the left of you, to the front, ahead of you, with the kind of Hetherington, so-called kissing roofs above Coldrops Yard. I mean, that's a pretty, that in itself is, you're getting that kind of visual cue that is a pretty cool place. So I think it's a combination of all of the above. I think what makes it really special is, and it sort of evolves over the day and over the week. So what you see at kind of Monday 8:30 is very different from Monday 6:30, which is very different from kind of Saturday at 10:30. It's a pretty changing mix. So that's quite successful, I think, and something to nurture. But to me, it feels like it's the kind of, if there was one particularly strong ingredient in the secret sauce or the cocktail, it's what happens at that ground floor plane. It's that kind of retail events, activation, the enlivenment, and just the kind of the activation that lots of people bring. And you can see that any estate has its kind of more, or any part of London has bits or roads or thoroughfares that are more crowded, more active than others. And it definitely feels like a more special place in the height of summer, with kids bombing in and out of the fountains and lots of people sitting outside having meals, as you would expect, right, in the way that Covent Garden does or anywhere else does. But I think, I'd be surprised if another kind of large estate owner or asset manager answered any differently, in the sense that that's kind of what makes it special, I would have thought.
What's your take on the market right now?
Hard to call. Is this a general real estate market question rather than kind of office-led?
Take it how you will.
Yeah.
Let's split it.
I mean, I think probably perception of office market could be more nuanced. So there's some, there's quite a lot of perception stuff out there. And I think if you are developing or owning prime real estate in central London or in central urban location, good transport, good amenities, you are on a winner. I actually also think that if you own pretty kind of cost-effective, no frills, sort of the other end of the value proposition,
like EasyJet, Ryanair,
yeah, the
equivalent.
kind of the equivalent of that. I think there's really good market for well-priced space that is quite functional.
Is that kind of like the workspace type product that you charge?
I mean, workspace covers quite a range actually, from like really quite like market-leading rents and buildings in central London through to a much lower price point in more local areas. And I'm in part influenced by that, but I do think that at the two ends of the value proposition, very premium or very cost effective, there's really quite active demand, is what I perceive, and that's not just an office thing. I think there's quite quite an interesting story for just well operated, meets the kind of basics, hygiene factors, office or resi or student housing, in at the kind of lower price point, and at the upper price point with much more premium products. It's the kind of squeezed middle, to paraphrase it, that I think is more difficult. So, I mean, that's my perception of the kind of office market. It's been a difficult environment to develop into, particularly if you're in that kind of middle section with costs escalating massively over the last few years. Obviously, that's calmed down quite a bit at the moment, but it's been a tough environment from that side. But what I think that means, and if you put a resi lens on it, all the stuff on Gateway, all of the stuff on, if you're building anything of height, all of the very sensible fire regulation, they compound when you add in, cost inflation and all of that. And if you're building to sell, it's not a brilliant story on the for sale market. The for rent side is more appealing at the moment. But I think that means that if you go on that journey and you build something and it's good quality or really affordable, I think you're in for, I think that's quite a good story. I think that's quite a good opportunity. I think it means as well, if you own an asset, so if you, have built resi and it's BTR or what have you, I think that bodes pretty well. I don't think it bodes particularly well for, the renter, in the fact there's just not a huge amount of supply. But from the kind of real estate supply side, I think both of those stories are quite interesting.
What do you think are some of the kind of the biggest challenges right now?
I think part of it was in the answer, in the sense of if you're trying to deliver something into the middle of the market, it doesn't cost that much less to build something of middle quality than it does to build high quality, excluding the kind of resi finishes, which can have a huge range to them. It doesn't cost that much less, if any less, to build in a kind of zone 2, zone 3 location. I use that in same of like in or out of Manchester, in or out of Edinburgh, or wherever it may be. So the premium story stacks up. And if you can build something really affordable, maybe that stacks up and you get the land at a decent price. Again, I think that squeeze middle.
That's where the opportunity,
I think so.
The challenge could be.
Yeah, and I think the challenge is sort of in that middle part of it. You're trying to lease or build something of kind of moderate quality. I think it's kind of harder to get people off the fence. If you've got something really compelling, obviously you have to have a market that can pay the price. The asking price. But I think there is, the data says that the market trends say that there is really a market for that on the office space. High end for sale, resi, a little bit tougher at the moment. But as a challenge, I think if you sort of, take that up higher, then getting the funding and people to buy into that slightly more nuanced story, especially if your funding is coming from abroad or what have you, and you have to find yourself the forum in, or make the forum within which to give that kind of more nuanced thing, rather than offices bad or data centers good kind of stuff. So a bit harder on that side, on the funding side, debt included. I think finding debt for resi right now, really difficult. Finding debt for a spec development in office development in Mayfair, you're probably onto a winner. So there's different pockets of opportunity and challenge, but I think, the macro is affecting everybody across all sectors. The global macro and geopolitics isn't helpful for anything, except maybe Trump's kind of social truth or whatever it is feed. But I just think, you have, and this is not about to get political, but you have a government that isn't necessarily giving people a whole sense of this is stable, this is trending upwards. It's been quite a negative, narrative over the last year. It's been peppered with things that people perceive, and again, not making this political, perceive as anti-business. And you have something come out in the recent weeks that says, upward only rent reviews are just suddenly going to be banned right now. Again, if you get the forum to have a nuanced discussion about it, is it the end of the world? What does it mean? What are the practical implications? The knee-jerk reaction is this has come out of nowhere, right? So what else is going to come out of nowhere? So I think if that's agnostic of any kind of sector or what have you, but as a sector that is ultimately driven by, some kind of connection to growth, GDP, people using your buildings, more people needing your buildings than there are buildings kind of thing, in order to have a upward trajectory on rents and values and interest rates and things coming down. You sort of look at those component parts of what it takes to deliver on a business plan over 5 or 10 years, and you say, well, there's risk around all of these things, right? And some of them I can control, like being close to my customers and doing a good job and curating a good space. And some of them just, you hope it's going to be okay.
You might have answered my next question, which is what keeps you up at night as a CEO?
It's not those things, because I can't control them. Maybe I should be up at night worrying about them, but I certainly can't do anything about them. I've had a reasonable amount to keep me up at night since joining the role, but not because there's kind of big concerns or things that I've sort of, turned over stones and thought there's massive problems here, but just the kind of our situation as the King's Cross Group, starting a business whilst having an operating business, starting an operating platform whilst operating the real estate, etc. It's just a lot to juggle, a lot been going on all fronts. And I think everybody in their role, regardless of seniority or level of responsibility, needs time to think. You need the sort of inverse. You need focus time. You need to have a focus to your role, that you're not doing 100 things at once. And you need time to think where you're doing very little, and actually that's when the kind of most productive things happen. My most sort of dangerous sentences start with "I've been thinking." That's sort of normally a prelude to, to probably fill out the question of what you were like when you were younger. Incredibly annoying, because I never stopped asking why. I always asked why. Never grew out of that thing of just saying, might be the way it's done, might be a good way to do it, but why do we do it that way? And if we can't rationalize it, let's have a think about changing it, not changing it for change's sake, but think about, can it be done better? So I think that keeps me up at night, just thinking, is this the right thing to be, should we do it this way, that way, what have you, what have I forgotten, what have I not got my eye on, am I being too short-term, long-term, internal, external? I think that's the challenge, is balancing all of those things.
Is there an imposter syndrome part to it, or not, just because of the different steps and moves and experience that you've had? You kind of feel like that step up to CEO and leadership based on setting up new platforms in Seattle, or stepping into new roles and situations, is it a case of trying to pull together all of that, those prior skills that you've stacked over many years, and it's your opportunity to kind of...
Yeah, I guess it would be not very humble if I said it's not imposter syndrome. So let the record bear that I said yes, but that's not necessarily what... I don't necessarily feel that. I've been quite fortunate. I've done kind of range of things. And then, as you manage larger teams, you pick up I'm no HR specialist, but you pick up HR generalist things, or you pick up from working with people who are really good at marketing, or, you pick up things across that. So there's clearly, everybody's going to have areas where they're more or less comfortable, but it's less about that and more about knowing that you don't know it, you can't see. You'll always have blind spots, right? Everybody does, regardless of whether you've, I think, been, doing your role, or you've been a CEO for 30 years or something. You're always going to have something which you just don't, because you've got to have your eye on so many different things. So what I'm trying to, and would really, have a have some track record in doing is getting people around me to tell me when I'm kind of being tone deaf or I've got a blind spot or what have you. So I like quite outspoken people around me who are going to really tell me that, you know, I'm off pace, or, you know, that I need to think about something I'm not, because it's bound to happen. But I guess when you're moving at the pace that we are moving at, and we've got a lot of deadlines in terms of people coming over as part of 2P process, starting up the business, etc., that aren't taking many prisoners in terms of, you know, spare time, that's fine. Those are completing those kind of goal objective. It's also the kind of having the longer term vision with the short term objectives as part of that, you know, the external versus the internal. It's that balance, I think.
Yeah.
And trying to see where your own blind spots are.
Do you work with CEO or career coaches, or have you had mentors before, or do you just have, you know, strong people around you that check, challenge, and a strong board as well that keeps you focused?
Yeah, I'm very lucky to have that. Really lucky to have the latter of a strong board, you know, really experienced chairman and people who really know what they're doing, and, you know, objectives are clear. But I don't know how prevalent mentorship is in really like formal mentorship. There are some industries where it's really prevalent. Again, it might be more a sign of when I sort of joined the industry versus what it is now. There might be way more opportunities for people coming out of university to go client side than there were, I felt, at my point in time. There might be way more structured mentorship programs than I'm aware of. It's certainly something I've been willing to do and have done for people. There are, you know, it's a good industry for people generally want to make the connection. Right. So if you reach out to somebody, people are generally quite good, as long as there's a reason for why you've got in touch. People want to make that connection generally if your worlds overlap. So there's that sort of informal mentorship, but you're sort of picking it up informally rather than, it's not something I have, and I've had in the past. And I've been quite deliberate to have people outside of the industry. So I was very fortunate at Workspace that there was the CEO of Harvey Nicks on the board. And I thought, do you know what, B2C, retail, clearly very capable, was risen up through ranks and runs Harvey Nicks, global brand. That seems like a good person. And she was very kind to give me some mentorship. So I think, it's not just about somebody who's done exactly what you've done. So I've tried to do that. And then I've had coaches, have coached. My wife is a coach as well. So I'm getting sort of coached on multiple fronts.
Fire hose, on all fronts.
She makes the transition very well from the domestic coaching to the professional coaching. It's a massive tone change, and it's good. So but that is genuinely very helpful.
Domestic doghouse, commercial doghouse.
Exactly.
The balance in between. Look, as we draw to a close, the question I ask everyone on the podcast is: if I gave you £500 million of the capital, who are the people, what property, in which place would you look to allocate it? So,
question for you: is this my last 500 million? Am I down to my final 500 million?
Your last 500 million, yes.
Geez, tough times.
Do you want any further, return profiles or qualifications around it, or are you going to take it as it is?
Do you know what? I think it would be wrong of me not to ask what you want to achieve, given you're giving me the 500 million. But I think if it were just an open kind of, where do you see opportunities, 500 million? I think one of the big sort of non-kind of sector specific opportunities, there's a much bigger UK equities picture that I perceive. I mean, obviously, some American M&A firms see the same thing, come over and buy sometimes at almost 100% premium to share price. That's when that happens a couple of times, you've got to see the UK stock market is a little depressed in value. But within that, I think there's quite a lot of opportunity in the REITs. Most REITs in the UK aren't particularly big size, have quite heavy operational overhead, and when you kind of think about the kind of consolidation or even just buying some stocks in, one of those companies, I think there's opportunity there. There should be opportunity for that discount to NAV to close, especially in the office space. I mean, you've got 30-40% discount to NAV. Some of that will be in the OPEX. A lot of that is in perception. It can't all be that these assets are 25% overvalued, I don't think. in the kind of prime space, central London space. So I think that's somewhere where I think would be, quite a good opportunity and quite liquid and quite, easy to get in and out of. But what I really like as kind of a general real estate play, sort of agnostic of sector, is buying kind of urban, like plots in urban locations. It doesn't have to be right in the center, but if you to sort of, there was a large sort of supermarket near every tube station 10, 15 years ago, right? So this kind of covered land play has definitely shrunk in opportunity, especially with the restrictions on all the difficulties in building kind of high-rise resi. But there's still a lot of covered land plays out there where you can buy something that gives you some yield, gives you some time whilst it is run as a depot or a supermarket or what have you, to work out whether resi or last mile industrial or some other commercial use is the best. And so I like that quite a lot, as just a kind of picking up a portfolio of land banks in places that just generally have quite decent fundamentals for demographics or people moving in, somewhere like a London. And so I think that would be a fun way to spend our 500 million.
Well, Leo, you've got a fascinating background, really interesting career. And, I know you're only a few months into the job at King's Cross, but I'm really excited to see what you and the team go on to do as you take the portfolio to the next level and keep it as a world-class
Try not to mess it up. That's what I heard.
Don't cock it up, Leo.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you.
Thanks,
I really
man.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Hey, quick one from me. If you enjoyed this conversation, do me a favor and share it with a friend or colleague that you think would get value from this conversation. It would mean the world and help grow the People Property Place podcast. Thank you so much.